I'm Sonya Morton-Firth, and you're tuned in to the Sonya Morton-Firth Show. Today, my guest is Carlos Tanner, director of the Ayahuasca Foundation in Peru. We discuss the extraordinary health benefits of ayahuasca, why consciousness plays an important part in the healing process, and the universal question of why we are here on planet Earth. Welcome, Carlos, to my show. I was about to say, welcome, you must be all the way in Peru. Look at that fantastic, fabulous backdrop. But you corrected me and told me you're in Massachusetts. How are you doing, Carlos? And welcome to the show.
Doing really good. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me to be on your show, Sonia.
Well, I'm very excited to get deep into some further discussions on ayahuasca. And as I just sort of mentioned to you, I had my first journey after having spoken to a veteran a few years ago, Keith Abraham, who I had on my show when I did my veteran series. And since then, I've been very intrigued into the wonders and the power of ayahuasca, or the grandmother, as the people call it. But Carlos, for my audience, could you tell me who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, my name is Carlos Tanner. I'm going to be 50 this year, and I'm the director of the Ayahuasca Foundation. We've been operating for the last 15 years in the Amazon rainforest of Peru. We work with an indigenous family from the Shipibo tribe, the Lopez Mahua family, and they're what would be called curanderos. And yeah, we offer programs at two different locations. So we offer shorter programs like 10 and 18-day retreats, and we also offer 4 and 8 week courses. And we're currently like operating a 4 week course that just started last weekend and an 8 week course that started 2 weeks ago. It's our 56th 8 week course that we've offered.
Wow, a lot of 50s there. Well, first of all, congratulations on being 50 or nearly being 50, you said. So it's a great time. Half century. I celebrated mine a couple of years ago as well. 50 good ones to come. That's how I say what I say. Um, it would be great just to get a bit of context, Carlos, into your story, and what led you into this journey of now becoming director of the foundation.
Sure. I consider myself to be a pretty normal person. I had what I also would consider to be a pretty normal childhood, at least as an American. I was fascinated with playing with Star Wars figures when I was a little kid, and I think I've tried to like trace back what potentially contributed to my interest in shamanism, and I do think that the Ewoks, which were in the Return of the Jedi film, had a shaman, and they had a figurine, a toy that you could play with that was the Ewok shaman. And that was my favorite toy when I was a little kid. So I didn't really know what a shaman was, but I think there was already some weird innate attraction to it. Later on in life, I would learn more about shamanism, especially by reading books like Michael Harner's The Way of the Shaman, and of course, Carlos Castaneda's books that were just fascinating to me. And so in college, I chose to study philosophy and continued my own personal like investigation into shamanism, leading me towards more contemporary authors like Terence McKenna, who wrote about ayahuasca, and yeah, and just going down that rabbit hole of trying to understand what that whole concept was, that whole paradigm, that whole perspective on reality. And then life continued on, and I unfortunately found myself going down a path of drug addiction. So back about 20 years ago in 2003, I was really spiraling downward into an opiate addiction, which led me to have a near-death experience where I woke up in my car underwater because I had blacked out behind the wheel from drinking and doing drugs and had to jump out the window and swim to shore. That was kind of a rock bottom moment for me where I made a declaration to God or to the universe that I would make a significant change in my life, that I didn't want to die. And then a couple, like less than 2 weeks later, maybe 10 days later, I got an email from a friend who was in Iquitos, Peru, in the Amazon rainforest, not knowing what had happened with me, but that she had met two people that knew a shaman and she was going to drink ayahuasca. And I had told her about ayahuasca because of my research, or the books that I was reading and the things I was learning. And so when she heard of ayahuasca, she thought of me and decided to email me to see if I wanted to go down to the Amazon and do it with her. And I thought that was a sign that this was like an opportunity for me to make that change that I wanted to make. I had wanted to drink ayahuasca for years, but I knew that I wanted to do it in the Amazon rainforest in an authentic experience, and here was my chance to do it. So in May of 2003, I flew down to Iquitos, Peru, and I had my first ayahuasca experiences, and they were life changing to say the least. It was a complete transformation and really kind of blew my concept of reality wide open. And during that time, the curandero that I was drinking with, whose name was Don Juan Tangoa Paima, it told me it was my path to be a healer, and he invited me to live with him and to study with him. And so I accepted his offer. And then in January 2004, I moved to Iquitos, Peru, and moved into his house with his family. And I lived with him for 4 years, studying the tradition. And at the end of that, I came up with the idea for the Ayahuasca Foundation, which we started in 2009.
Wow. Wow, that was that's quite a journey. There's so many things I want to pick up on there. First of all, I love Star Wars. When you mentioned the Ewok, I was smiling from ear to ear because I've got this fascination about Star Wars as well. But anyway, much more serious things. Can you talk to me a little bit more about your first experiences of ayahuasca? If somebody is listening and never had experience ayahuasca, I'm sure there's many people that haven't experienced it and they don't understand what ayahuasca is. Could you give us sort of a layman's terms or an easy definition for people to understand what drinking ayahuasca is?
Wish there was an easy answer, but I can tell you some of the like logistics maybe. Ayahuasca is a medicine. It's been used for thousands of years in the Amazon rainforest, and its prime ingredient is a vine that's also called ayahuasca. Scientifically, it's known as Banisteriopsis caapi. And from a chemical perspective, it contains what we call monoamine oxidase inhibitors, namely harmine, tetraharmine, and harmaline, which prevent the production of a particular enzyme called monoamine oxidase in our gut, which would be the enzyme that would break down certain chemicals, specifically the chemical dimethyltryptamine. And so that vine is mixed with plants that contain dimethyltryptamine, the most common being a plant called chacruna, which is scientifically known as Psychotria viridis. And if you were to just ingest dimethyltryptamine, at least orally, then you would not really feel much of an effect because it would be broken down by that enzyme in your gut. But when taken with an MAOI or a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, the dimethyltryptamine stays intact so that it can travel through your gut and your digestive system up into your brain, where it activates the pineal gland. And what that does is essentially, as I see it, reduces sensory gating. Or another way of saying that would be it expands access to sensory information. So it allows us to see beyond the visible spectrum or to hear beyond the audible spectrum, which our organs, our sense organs, already take in that information. But through a process called sensory gating, our brain has learned, probably through an evolutionary process, to select a certain frequency of sound and light and other sense information such that we're not overwhelmed and we can function. And so while we're taking in all that information, we don't have access to it. And ayahuasca allows us a larger scale or a greater spectrum of access to sensory information. And when we have that, it's kind of akin to being in a dimly lit room and then having someone turn the lights on. So while you're doing the best that you can to understand your environment with what you can see and hear, now when someone turns the lights on and you can see more, then you have a better idea or a better ability to interpret your experiences more accurately and thus can change misinterpretations that may be holding you back, especially if those interpretations have to do with your self-identity or your role in the world or, ideas that become a part of our belief system that are unfortunately detrimental to our well-being. So we have a chance to make important changes within our belief system that then have the effect of changing the quality of our life or the accuracy of our self-perceptions and hopefully to improve our health as a result.
Wow. So going back to your experience or your first experiences of ayahuasca when you'd hit rock bottom, and you'd gone on that first experience, can you walk me through some of those experiences?
Sure. Well, again, this was 2003, so ayahuasca wasn't very well known. I wasn't going to a retreat center. They were just starting to become like a thing. And
We'll talk about
um,
that.
so, so I was just going to this curandero's house or the shaman. I'm going to refer to them as curandero, and I was going to drink ayahuasca. So I had no idea that there should be any preparation. I did no preparation. I was a drug addict, so I was using drugs like right up, I think maybe even that day, but definitely the day before and the days, leading up to that. And I think that's important because my first experience was, it was eye-opening and it was fascinating. It was also like brutal. I was terrified. I had a, really like unpleasant physical response to the medicine. I threw up a dozen times, or if not more. I crapped my pants. Like I had a really strong physical response, which I definitely would attribute to the fact that I had no preparation, and so I was like totally polluted. And a big part of that first ceremony's process was to detoxify.
Mm.
But I was also just, I was fascinated by the reality of the experience. And, but I couldn't discern what was real or what was not, or like, I was having visions and then I would respond to the visions like as if they had just happened to me in like the real world. And so I was confused. Like the majority of the experience, I was crying. I was asking myself why I ever wanted to do this. And, I would say that if you had asked me, after that experience how it was, I'd say it was pretty awful. But thankfully, there was a person in that ceremony. Again, this wasn't like a tourism situation. So there were local people, and one of the people in my first ceremony was the chief of the Achwari tribe, which is not normal, but I didn't know that. And he interacted with me for literally 5 seconds, but it was a really profound interaction because I was outside in the grass, in the fetal position, crying, and he came out and seemed to be unaffected by the ayahuasca, at least certainly not to the degree that I was. And I watched him throw up and, not crying or agitated or loss of balance or anything, just, needed to throw up. And then he saw me in the grass as he was going back into the ceremony, and he just waved his arm back to me. That was the whole interaction. He didn't speak Spanish. I didn't speak Spanish either, but that let me know that, oh man, this isn't the ayahuasca. This is me. It's my response. So I began to then look at like myself instead of thinking this is what ayahuasca does. I started to think, no, this is what I'm doing with ayahuasca. And that was an incredibly helpful shift in perspective that allowed me to recognize that it was my fear that was actually creating the terror, actually creating a lot of the physiological responses, as well as, my own polluted system. But that and the processing, as I thought about it more after the ceremony and the next day, really made me want to go back and do it again. I did stop using drugs as a result. I didn't want to have the experience that I just had again. And I knew that a part of that, if not the majority, was the result of using drugs leading up to it. So that was a great motivation to like stop using drugs. But I also really worked a lot on not being afraid and to, approach the experience from a neutral perspective instead of, responding with fear. And and that turned out to be massive for me. So the next ceremony was a completely different experience. One, because I was far less polluted, and then two, because my perspective of how to respond to the experience had radically shifted. And so the next experience was absolutely amazing. But my first experience was really challenging and a big struggle, and I spent most of the night in a state of terror.
Do you think so? So I mentioned before I recently had my first experience, and unlike you, I did the whole dieta before I went into it. So I'm quite fit and healthy anyway, and so I pretty much went in, I think, as clean as I could be. Might have had a bit of salt or something a couple of days before, but nothing, a bit of dairy, but certainly no drugs, certainly no alcohol, certainly no pharmaceutical drugs, or meat or anything like that. And I was very scared, having read about people being sick, shitting themselves. I think that was the biggest worry in our small group, and we were only 6 people, of these things. And I wasn't sick, and I didn't shit myself. The other people in the group, a lot of them were sick, or purged, and I wasn't quite sure whether was there a necessarily an emotional reason or a psychological reason if you're sick, or you're crying, or um, why that is, or is it just really dependent on what you've eaten before or had taken in before?
Well, actually, I don't think, I mean, in terms of what you're eating, I don't think that it makes that much of a difference. Maybe that day, if you had had dairy for lunch, as an example, then that's more likely. But leading up to it, I don't think there's actually that much difference. It all depends if you're eating Big Macs or something, all the time. But for the most part, I don't think that the diet leading up to it has that much impact. I do think that the mindset is a lot more, and that's a very complex topic to try to get into, because there's just so many components to our consciousness, right? I know that some people really don't want to throw up. They have kind of a built-in mechanism already, and so, maybe if you ask them like when's the last time you threw up, it would be like, oh, a decade ago. Like they kind of developed a operational model, if you want to call it that, where they're just not going to throw up. And so that would be a factor. That'd be a way of like describing it. Other people might have a more like delicate response mechanism. So if they feel nausea, oh yeah, well, I'm just gonna like throw up as a response to that. And so again, it's a little bit too complicated, but I tried so many different things, just experimenting with diet, and I didn't really see that there was a noticeable difference. I mean, I wasn't trying to do drugs or like, but in terms of like what I was eating, sometimes I would fast and see if that had a difference, or if I would just eat fruit and see if that had a difference, or if I would eat fried chicken and French fries and see if that had a difference. And to be totally honest, I didn't really see very much of a difference. What I did see the difference in was definitely in my mindset, and that changes, even over the course of a few days, our mindset can change to how we're feeling that day or what we're thinking about, or what's going to come up in our consciousness. And we know that's true, because one day you might have a brilliant day, and the next day, irregardless, or not dependent on your diet, but the next day something reminds you of something that is triggering to you or makes you feel sad, or it changes our moods. And I think that actually contributes a lot more to the experience than anything else.
I mean, it was very interesting because we all had very, very different experiences, and I'm sure you've been doing this for years. You must see people that come to your retreats, and do most people have a very different experience, or is there a sort of a common experience that people have?
Well, I guess, you could say there is a common experience, but it's a pretty big window of what that experience is. So, an altered state of consciousness is very common. But what specifically might happen? Again, I think that some people have the idea already, oh man, this is gonna be really tough. I need a lot of healing, or I've got a lot of, stuff buried, or, they kind of like set themselves up for a particular type of experience. Not that that necessarily always plays out. Sometimes they're pleasantly surprised, like, oh, I thought it was gonna be much harder. On the flip side, some people think that they're totally ready and that they're all good to go. And then turns out, no, actually, a lot of stuff came up that they didn't think they needed to work on, but here it is, and they do. So for that reason, I don't know if I don't think you can really make too many predictions. You do the best that you can to put yourself in the best mindset. That's always what I'm coaching people to try to do. But you also do the best that you can throughout the experience. And I would say that my focus is always on trying to be as aware as possible about my state of being. And almost always, if not always, my experience that appears to be like what's happening is directly influenced, if not completely dictated by my state of being at the time. So as an example, like if I'm in a state of guilt, then that will strongly affect my experience. If I'm in a state of fear, which was what I was in the first ceremony, then it was a terrifying experience. Looking back now, I can see, oh, no, it was my state of fear that caused me to describe and interpret my experience as terrifying. And then the next experience where I didn't have that fear, I interpreted the experience completely differently. So we always interpret our experiences as, and we perceive and respond to our experiences according to our state of being. Therefore, putting our awareness on that state of being is how we can gain control over our perceptions and our interpretations, or at least do our best to improve them. We might not be able to control them, but we can at least put effort into improving them.
And I guess on that, it's knowing what to do with those experiences or messages once you've had them. I had what all I can explain or say it was an absolutely mind blowing, amazing experience of sort of why we are here. I was about to say it's going to sound very funny, but I'm sure it isn't. It's going to sound funny to you. But why we are here, the universe, love, gratitude, connection. Oh, I mean, amazing. I saw us all as one energy, our breath being a vital life force. Um, why we're on this planet. There was so many things that came I couldn't move. I didn't move for the whole time. And people said afterwards, you didn't move a muscle because I was almost being blasted. I said a few things out loud, like, wow, I get time and space. I'm convinced I traveled in time and space and saw different dimensions. But the funny thing that I had afterwards, and I don't know if this is relevant, but I'm just going to mention it, is for the next, in fact, I've only just finished having massive vertigo. And this was 3 months ago. So my body and mind sort of haven't really caught up with each other. I've been, all I can call it is like dizzy for the past 3 months, where I feel like the whole world, the earth is moving. And yeah, like a sort of vertigo feeling. It's finished now. I spoke to a couple of people. I didn't go to the doctors about it, but I presumed it was related. And I think what I'd like to do is link that back to what the physical effects are of taking ayahuasca, sort of the benefits. Because obviously you've got the psychological and the physical sides, but can you talk a little bit more around the sort of the physical benefits of ayahuasca?
Sure. I again like uh, my from my perspective, what ayahuasca does is reduce sensory gating. So, I chose the two like most famous senses, I guess, which would be vision and hearing. But our tactile sense is a very real sense as well, and perhaps we could look at that in terms of sensation. And so it would also reduce sensory gating for sensation, meaning that we would be able to access a greater spectrum of sensational information, or the information of our sense of body. And and so, how long that lasts has so much to do with our consciousness and, like the mind body connection. Once you become aware that there is more information out there, then you don't really let go of it. I mean, some people can just kind of come back to their previous baseline, so to speak. But I think more common is that people are forever changed. And and so, once you can see beyond the visible spectrum, once you can hear beyond the audible spectrum, once you can sense beyond the sensory spectrum, then you have the memory of that. And that memory then serves to inform your belief system about that, about what is out there or what we are experiencing. And and so I think that's of great advantage to us, because again, it like opens the door for a change to happen. And there are some physical aspects that probably happen whether you're aware of them or not. Some of the detox elements of that, some of the like harmonization, you could call it, like bringing into balance or into harmony our systems. Um, but obviously, it's hard to talk about what is happening outside of our awareness, because it would require the awareness to be able to talk about it. But I do think that there is still a pretty wide range. Some people at the end of a ceremony are incredibly energized. They feel, connected to the universe, and there is like the feeling that they are flowing with this energy, coming in and out of them or connected to them. And some people come out of a ceremony and they're wiped out, and they feel like they have no energy. And and I guess to me, I would still attribute that to their responses and their interpretations. And, if you enter into a unique or novel state of consciousness or state of being, I think it's natural to recognize that it is unique or novel. But I think it could also be natural that someone might think this is wrong. This is not how I normally am, and then try to spend the rest of their time getting themselves to where they normally are, and essentially like resisting and struggling through the experience. On the flip side of that, some people can respond and say, wow, this is unique and novel and amazing. And then really like embrace rather than resist the experience. And then they're not actually struggling. They're like opening themselves up to the potential of the experience. And I think that that is what I look at the most. I think that we could all put ourselves on a scale of from resistance to embrace. And the goal would be to get yourself as closest to embrace and as far from resistance. And and when there is a total embrace, like something really, really magical happens. And I think that the word faith speaks to that state of total embrace. That's what that word means to me, at least. And and doubt, leads to that resistance, and that has such a tremendous impact on how we perceive and interpret our experiences.
Just going to the sort of the health benefits of uh, of plant-based medicines and ayahuasca, because there's been, I know you've done some stuff, not you personally, but I know there's are you doing studies on sort of the effects on firstly trauma, which there's a lot of there is research around there, but also just the physical health benefits around. I mean, I've heard people even say it can help with cancer. Is there anything you can talk more about around those sort of topics?
Yeah, well, I just I don't think I know that we have to use language, and language kind of creates separation, and so we have kind of the idea, well, if you have a mental illness, then you need to go to a psychiatrist, and but if you have a physical illness, then you go to your general practitioner, whatever name they have for it. And if you have a spiritual illness, then you go to maybe your religious leader or someone like that. And um, but the reality is that there isn't that separation. And and so our consciousness is in every cell of our body. Our consciousness is in every physical element of our body, every emotional element of our body, every mental element of our system, and every spiritual element, as I see it at least. And so, yes, like, can a person be healed of cancer? Without a doubt. In fact, there was a documentary film called The Ayahuasca Diary, and that I was in, and there was a gentleman from Los Angeles who had prostate cancer. He'd had it for 3 years, and he came down and he did an 18-day retreat. And when he went home, he had a biopsy and he's cancer free. And that was filmed in 2008. He's still cancer free.
Wonderful.
So, I don't know how long you wait to decide that it's cured, but I think that 16 years later, if you're still cancer free, you can reliably say that you're cured. But he had so much faith. He right off the bat, he said, I know that the plants will heal me. And I chose this over Western medicine because I know that this will work better. And so he was ready to embrace the experience from the get-go. And that's huge. As opposed to the idea of scientific research that you kind of take a random sampling, and there's not very much consideration to a person's belief system, their faith, or their consciousness. It's just the idea that, oh, well, the medicine will just do it. Because in Western medicine, we tend to ignore intentionally the element of consciousness, which is why we have a double-blind study. We recognize the power of consciousness, but we're trying so hard to eliminate it so that we can keep to a narrative that the physical body is somehow unaffected by consciousness, even though we also recognize the placebo effect is a reality, which is wholeheartedly due to consciousness. But again, we kind of want to like throw that out, like that was just the placebo effect, so like ignore that, which is shameful to me. But for that reason, if a person were to come down, and I have seen that also, where a person comes down hoping to heal cancer, but it's a last resort, and they, have tried a bunch of things that didn't work. They don't have faith in plant medicine. They just hope that they can find something. And that's a really different perspective. And so, if you were to imagine a scientific study, it would take a bunch of people, whether they believe it's going to work or not, they kind of want to have that random sampling. But in something like ayahuasca, and to be honest, I think all cases of healing, a person's consciousness to me is the most important aspect. And within the ayahuasca tradition, it is well recognized to be the most important aspect. And the tradition itself fosters faith. And the rituals and the ideologies and methodologies that surround the use of ayahuasca heavily contribute to the improvement of a person's consciousness towards faith. and and we don't see that in Western medicine. It's a whole different way of looking at it. In our world, in the Western world, you just take the medicine. It doesn't matter. That's the idea. Although we also have those examples, which I just mentioned, which prove that completely wrong. You could take a sugar pill and it could heal you completely. So it is not the medicine. It is definitely your consciousness, but in collaboration with the medicine, you get the best effects or the outcome.
Let's just talk about you mentioned there the traditions and the ceremonies around taking the plant-based medicine, and how we sort of don't have that around pharmaceutical medicines here. You, like you say, you pop a pill and you know that, or you think by taking a headache pill, it's gonna, your headache is going to go away. In terms of taking ayahuasca, there is a whole ceremony and tradition around that, which I wasn't so aware of until I got into it before I was about to take it, and I was informed of the dieta process that I followed a few weeks before, and then this ceremony, which I didn't really realize what it really involved until we were sort of told on the day about it. Could you, just sort of playing devil's advocate on that note, some people just pop mushrooms in front of a TV program to have a comedy night and watch a funny film and have a giggle. Other people take mushrooms, and I'm sorry, I'm using mushroom psilocybin, to open up their consciousness and figure out the meaning of life or their purpose or other things. But it's a very much a conscious decision, I guess, on how you want to take that drug. Could the same be said for ayahuasca? Could you just take ayahuasca in front of the TV and have some sort of experience? I'm sure you would have an experience, but would it be the same experience as the ceremony and that whole tradition as that part of it?
Oh, no, of course not, but neither would it be with the mushrooms. Neither would it be if you took nothing. Like if you just went to a ceremony and didn't drink any ayahuasca, or you just watch TV. The experience is going to be very, very different. And I wish that Western medicine would acknowledge that and work with that more. I think that we could implement changes into Western medicine through our understanding of the enhancement of consciousness by studying traditions like this that would greatly improve the outcome. And the idea of chemotherapy ceremonies, as an example, is something that I think would be awesome. If you've been prescribed chemotherapy, then you go out to a center that's not at the hospital, and there is a preparation and there are guidance in the ideology of it, and the ceremony procedure enhances the attention and the awareness. Whereas, when you take chemotherapy in a hospital, most of the time you are watching TV. You are like reading a magazine. You're doing something to like divert your attention away from the treatment that you want to heal you, but yet somehow you hate that treatment. You have tremendously negative perceptions of the treatment that you want to make positive changes in you, but you bring it into your own inner environment of negativity. You have negative perceptions of it at the same time that you want it to heal you, which to me is kind of like calling someone you hate when you need help. It's a bizarre like setup to me that already is kind of doomed to fail. Now, of course, everyone like is a very complex being. And so, even if you were to take mushrooms in front of the TV under the idea that, oh, I'm just gonna like have a fun little night and laugh, at some point, maybe because of something that's on the TV program that you watch, or maybe because of some feelings that you have, you might say during that experience, I'm not gonna watch this anymore. I'm gonna go outside and walk in the woods. And that's really what would happen for me. Like when I was in college, I would take mushrooms or take a psychedelic, and then I'd be at a party, but by the time the night was over, I'd be out in the woods by myself. And I feel like that was kind of like an inkling that, okay, I have a different idea about this stuff. And so, yeah, like what you do with a psychedelic is incredibly important. And with any drug or with anything in your life, like the consciousness is to me at the core and the most important aspect of the experience.
Absolutely. Can you walk me through, or our audience through a sort of an idea of the ceremony, and the tradition, of ayahuasca, particularly with what your foundation in Peru? Because as I understand, there are so many various different tribes that they probably have various different slight or different traditions.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think an easy way just to like start off or to create a framework is that I look at healing as an art form, and an ayahuasca ceremony is definitely a performance. But it is a ceremony, and I think that the word ceremony, if we were to just imagine that we're going to go to a ceremony, already there are ideas about our conduct, about our our perspective, like how we feel about it. Like there's this desire to be respectful and to honor. And that could be, going to a wedding ceremony or going to a funeral ceremony or going to any ceremony. The word ceremony implicitly implies that there is a code of conduct that we would follow that is respectful and honoring. And and so the mechanics of the ceremony would be that every person would show up. There would already be an element of that respect where you would show up before the person who will be leading the ceremony shows up. Like you don't want to go to a ceremony late. And and so, there's just these elements of respect that are automatically built in. So you would get to a ceremony space, you would have some time to kind of settle, to make sure that you feel comfortable, to be aware of your surroundings. Maybe you meet people that are next to you if you haven't already met them. But really you're not, in a framework of joking around or talking about what you did the other day, or whose sports team won, or what television program just came out, or any of that. It's automatic, again, that you're bringing yourself into a state of focus, and that of course relates to how important the experience is to you. Someone might come in and tell a bunch of jokes, or talk about things like that, if depending on how important this was to them. um, when everyone was settled, then the person leading the ceremony, the curandero, would come in, usually at the end when everyone has like gotten ready. They would go through a series of procedures that are rituals that help to prepare the space and help to prepare the medicine and help to prepare themselves. And some of those would be like in the form of prayers or using tools like their pipe and blowing tobacco smoke over themselves, over their medicines, over their other tools, using a perfume like Agua Florida, again, like blowing the perfume onto themselves, rubbing it on themselves, and there's like a whole set of rituals, and like you mentioned, those would be different for each person according to their own style and their own tradition and their own personal beliefs and needs maybe at the time. But then at a certain point, the ceremony would be like ready. And then as we do it, each person comes up to the curandero and receives a cup of ayahuasca. They're typically informed that they should be stating their intention in their mind as if speaking to ayahuasca to bring to the forefront of their consciousness the reason that they're there, and also to communicate to the spirit of ayahuasca the reason that they're there, because it will be a collaborative effort to attain their goals or to make progress towards those goals. And person will then drink the ayahuasca, go back to their place, and everyone will come up and drink a cup of ayahuasca. The last person to drink the ayahuasca is typically the curandero, and at which point the lights will be turned off or the candles will be extinguished or total darkness will be achieved. Now, again, this is in the Shipibo tradition. That most of the Peruvian traditions are darkness ceremonies, but there are traditions outside or other traditions that do use fire as an example or other elements that would not be in darkness. But our ceremonies are done in darkness. Then there'd be a little bit of a period of silence where everyone is essentially waiting for the effects of ayahuasca to come on, especially the curandero, who will begin the ceremony when they begin to feel those effects. And then they'll open the ceremony, and they do that by singing. And in fact, most of the ceremony involves singing. And so in that sense, it is a real artistic performance. The singing, it plays an incredibly important role. It is a communication with the spirits of the plants who are invited to come to the ceremony and then who are directed or in collaboration with the curandero guided to perform healing acts on the participants of the ceremony.
Why do you believe we're here, Carlos?
Why? Ah, interesting. I I mean, I think that my easiest answer is that we are here to live with the goal of improving our frequency, our state of being. So to rise to a new plane of existence. Um, I think that we come into this reality that has time, that has a before and an after because change is only possible if there is a before and an after. And so if our spirits reside in an eternal dimension, um, we want to, if we want to change, to improve, then we want to be in a place that allows us the opportunity for change to occur. So we choose to be born into a body on earth as an opportunity for us to make changes so that at the end of our life, when we go back to the eternal state or dimension, we have risen to a new plane of existence or a new frequency, and we will continue to do that. And I do think that there is a whole other set of dimensions beyond this one. So, should we ever get to that place of enlightenment, if you want to call it that, or ascension, what we will be ascending into is just another dimension where we will again want to improve and strive to raise our frequency up further. But where all of that goes, I don't know. Like I don't know the end game of it.
Why do you think, what do you think the role of ayahuasca is on this planet?
Oh, I think that ayahuasca could be looked at in a number of ways, but I like to think of it as an agent of the immune system of the earth. So I think that
Beautiful.
ayahuasca allows us to expand our awareness so that we can gain insights into how we can improve our own well-being. And in doing so, we will improve the well-being of the being of the planet that we are a part of, through that connection, which is a part of the insights, like remembering that we are all connected the same way that my 5 trillion cells of my body are all individuals, yet it's through their collaboration and their connection that I achieve my health. We are all individuals that are all interconnected as the body of the earth, and it is through our collaboration and connection that we bring about a higher level of health of the earth. And then the earth is just an individual in the body of a much larger being, and that goes on and on and on until the ultimate being, which I would call God. So I think of ayahuasca and the other plant medicines that are available as these agents of our immune system that bring us into alignment, that allow us access to a greater awareness such that we can use those insights to improve our own health, and in so doing, improve the health of the greater whole that we're a part of, and then thus, on and on and on until God, I guess, achieves its perfection.
It's become very popular, I guess. Well, you so said you first tried ayahuasca in 2003. I don't think I'd even heard, I certainly hadn't heard of it in 2003. But over the last few years, it seems to have increased, and tell me if I'm wrong, in popularity. Obviously, there's been, and I know you were on a Netflix series as well. Zac Efron did a series, and one of his episodes, he filmed in Peru and filmed at your retreat. Why do you think it has become so popular now? When I say now, probably over the last 10, 20 years, as compared to, and obviously I'm not taking the whole tradition because it's been around for centuries or since since the planet began, I guess. Why more recently now, do you think?
Well, I think it's important to remember that all of our ancestors, your ancestors, my ancestors, every single person that is listening to this show, all of our ancestors relied on plant medicines for thousands of years, and they were one of, if not the most important aspect of our ability to heal and understand what it means to be a human being. In Europe, the Eleusinian mysteries that were practiced for thousands of years, that were most likely based on a plant medicine that could be closer to LSD, that essentially formed the roots of the foundations of Christianity. Northern Europe, which used fly-agaric mushrooms, every country, every culture, they all relied on plant medicines for a very, very, very long time. And so it was really more recently that we stopped rather than that we are now starting. We're now returning to the memories that our ancestors had and the insights and the wisdom that our ancestors had for so long, but unfortunately was stopped just in the last 1,000 years or so, or hundreds, depending on which culture we're from. And and so I do feel like that was by design, to be honest. I think that the earth had an agenda, a plan for a certain group of humans to do something that needed our separation from that insight. And I love playing with those ideas. I don't want to confess that I have any like true knowledge of them, but I love imagining them and thinking about them. But 100 years ago or a little bit over that, we invented an airplane. And that allowed us to be able to travel around the world, not immediately. So I definitely think that was a big part of it. Then, there was a guy named Richard Evans Schultes who's kind of a hero to me. After graduating from Harvard with a degree in botany in 1941, he flew down to the Amazon rainforest and spent 14 years in the Amazon rainforest and probably was one of the first Westerners to ever drink ayahuasca. And he didn't just drink it once, he traveled all around visiting lots of different tribes and drank ayahuasca with lots of different tribes and wrote about it. And even before that, at Harvard, he studied mushrooms and the use of ceremonial mushroom use in Mexico, which led to Gordon Wasson going down and drinking mushrooms in ceremony with Maria Sabina and writing an article in Life magazine called In Search of the Magic Mushroom, which really set the whole world, or at least the hippie movement, towards the psychedelic experience again. And so I do feel that when people started to come back to psychedelic experiences, it was reviving an ancestral memory in us, and that needed to happen because, well, we needed to have the ability to travel those distances to visit those tribes. But we also needed to have certain pioneers like Richard Evans Schultes that viewed indigenous people differently. They had been viewed kind of as savages or inferior beings, and it took like some pioneers like him to demonstrate that no, these people have tremendous wisdom and that there are things that we don't understand. So there's a lot of things going on. I think at the same time we've been losing more and more trust in Western medicine, and we've been feeling like we're being duped, or that we're almost being conned, and also that it's just kind of obvious that the methods aren't working. And we're not healthier now than we were before Western medicine. We're far less healthy. And that's not just the culprit of medicine. It's kind of where we've been headed in society and civilization. And so again, we associate indigenous cultures with people that were able to maintain balance for 100,000 years. And yet here we are like messing it all up in a very short amount of time. And so again, when we have the opportunity to take part in an indigenous or ancestral tradition, especially one that produces the results or the effects of a psychedelic tradition like ayahuasca, I do feel that it revives in us a memory of our own ancestral knowledge and our own ancestral wisdom. And we feel that connection. And our response to that is a knowing that this is the right path to take. So I think that the popularity has exploded the same way that a lot of things explode. It took one person in the 40s to write about it, which then led to a handful of people in the 50s to explore it and write more about it, which led to, hundreds of people in the 60s, which then kind of exploded into thousands, and now we're at millions of people. But it's, the roots of it, I think, could be traced back to a knowing within us that has been dormant since our own ancestral traditions were stopped,
I mean,
but now we're reviving them.
oh, you mentioned that the 60s, that's when it was sort of put, the, at the time, it became so big and then it was sort of squashed uh, under certain presidents. Do you think we're at a risk that that could happen again as we start expanding our consciousness levels? Is there a threat? Not is there a perceived threat by certain organizations, by certain people, that actually free thinking, I'm going to say free thinking, but or heightened levels of consciousness goes against maybe what they're trying to create?
Well, I can't predict the future. Of course, the idea that there might be that risk that things will be like attempted to shut down, but I think that if we were to honestly look at the results of what happened in the 60s, we would see that it didn't really stop us. It did make things go underground, and it caused a much greater distrust of the people in authority positions. And so, if those same authority positions are thinking, how should we respond to this? I don't know, but I would like to think that they were like, well, last time we tried to stop it, it caused everyone to nearly have a revolution to overthrow us. So I don't know if that's going to be the best option now, where the distrust is way more now than it was in the 60s.
Absolutely.
There was still a general idea of trust in the 60s that it's hard for me to identify that level of trust now, where we really just don't trust the government at all anymore, and rightfully so. But there's a key feature that I think is really remarkable, which is that the 60s was heavily tied into the Vietnam War. You know, JFK and RFK were assassinated because they were against the war. Most likely they were killed by the people that didn't want us to avoid that war, but wanted us to be in that war. And so we sent off all these soldiers. And and those soldiers came back and they were messed up.
Yeah.
They had issues that our society had no answer for. And that's continued to happen. And so now there's this huge population of veterans who are in a really bad way, that have incredibly high suicide rates and that are suffering from PTSD as a result of their service to the country. But yet the country they served isn't able to help them with the issues that were caused by the government's decisions to send them to the war. And psychedelic therapy has proven itself to be incredibly effective to treat those traumas. And so now we have this interesting situation where the government that didn't want people to take psychedelics because they would be anti-war now need those same psychedelics to help the soldiers that they sent over to fight those wars, or else they will not have more soldiers, because people aren't going to want to volunteer to fight in a war if they know they're going to come back and be all messed up and no one will help them. So now the government has this real obligation to explore and approve and make available psychedelic therapies to their veterans that are suffering with PTSD, so that they can have more soldiers. But yet at the same time, there's a high likelihood, I would say, that if we greatly expand the use of psychedelics in our culture, then we will come to a place where we will not tolerate the the wars that
Wars.
these soldiers are being sent for. So it's a really interesting place to see,
It's
like
it's a
how things will. Yeah.
yeah, like a circle of life. It's literally just what you've said there makes complete sense. I've met so many, or I've met a lot of veterans that have suffered from PTSD and trauma, and have used psychedelics under controlled situations, and it's massively helped them overcome. And like you say, this is now research that's that's absolutely uh, been shown to sort of to help. And yet how hypocritical of the government, as you say, because they're the ones that sent them out in the first place. And yeah, it's one of life's ironies, I think, if that's the right word for this.
Well, it's almost like poetic in the sense that I think that the government, if they were to try to shut that down and essentially say, no, we're not going to help the veterans who served our country, they they would be immediate backlash. They
Of
would,
course.
the perception, like, you want me to join the army and you're not even helping the veterans? Like, are you kidding?
Mm.
Like, forget it and go fight your wars on your own. And and I do think there's also some element where there is this desire, like, well, if we can get them healthy, then we can send them out again. Like we want to keep our soldiers healthy so we can keep getting them to fight wars. I really think that's going to backfire a
Well,
lot
if
on
they
them,
take
but they don't
psychedelics,
have much choice. They're not in a place where they have a big choice right now. They don't have many other options. So it's I definitely feel like the veterans in the US are pushing the legalization of psychedelic therapies more than any other group
I agree.
because because the government does feel that obligation. Well, I mean, they have that obligation. It's not that they feel it. It directly falls on their shoulders as the obligation to take care of the people that serve their country and military.
Yeah. I mean, we're slowly getting there in terms of medical uses to treat depression and trauma. Unfortunately, and I'm going to say this because I've interviewed a lot of English veterans. We don't treat our veterans the same way as you treat the veterans over in the US. Unfortunately, not. But certainly, there are moves, and I know you know that there are moves in the UK where the NHS and other colleges have been used or helping with the studies of psychedelics in connection with trauma and treating depression.
Well, of course. I mean, there's a few channels at play altogether. I think the military is the most intriguing, and I do think, like I said, it's pushing the fastest. Um, I think if we didn't have the military, then I don't think the laws would be changing as quickly. There are like bills in government bills that are coming up that are tacking on like huge budgets to study psychedelic therapy for veterans. That wouldn't be if there were no veterans, those bills wouldn't have that budget. But there is certainly a medical track, like there's a lot of people in the field of medicine that want to explore it more because they see the tremendous efficacy of it. There's a huge academic track as well. Honestly, there's a huge recreational track where there's just been so many people that have found benefit from using it on their own without like a therapeutic setting and so all four of those are shifting our perceptions. And then when you throw in like big names like Will Smith and Aaron Rodgers and Miley Cyrus and these like uber famous people talking about how much ayahuasca helped them in their life, then you you've got a movement on your hands.
Definitely. Coming back to your retreats, Carlos, can you give my audience, if people are intrigued about how to find out more information and what the retreats include, where should they go to? I know you've got a fabulous website, but what do your retreats include as well?
Thank you. Yeah, we try to be as comprehensive as possible about every aspect of the healing experience. So it's a really holistic program. It's not just ayahuasca ceremonies. The ayahuasca ceremonies are at the core of the treatment, but on a 10-day retreat, as an example, you would do a digestive system cleanse. You would do detoxifying vapor baths. You would take medicines that increase oxygenation and circulation. You would take medicines that increase sensitivity, anti-inflammatory remedies. You would have plant baths that increase positive attraction or positive energy that protect you. There would be a central nervous system cleanse. There's respiratory system cleanse. So there's a lot of treatments outside of the ayahuasca ceremonies that all contribute to the overall outcome. And it's a really holistic program. And you can learn a lot more about that program as well as our others by visiting our website, ayahuascafoundation.org.
Great. And we'll put the links in. Are there any final things that we haven't covered that you would like to say?
Well, I mean, it's such a, I could talk for days, and I'm happy to do that. But I would say that the most important thing that I've learned is awareness of my state of being. And I talked about it a little bit in our conversation just now, but really it's to me the most important lesson I've learned about life, even though it came from my experiences with ayahuasca inside the indigenous tradition, it's something that I apply to life every moment that I can remember. And that's the key about having my awareness of my state of being, because our state of being not only dictates how we perceive and interpret our experiences, but it changes the world around us. And in order to be in my highest state of being, it is necessary for me to surrender my low states of being. So, in order for me to reach a state of joy, as an example, then I do need to release my states of guilt and shame and fear and anger. And that's a big part of the healing process. But if I'm in a state of joy, then not only do I perceive the world around me as joyful, but I radiate the frequency of joy out into the world, and the world is influenced by that frequency. And so we do make the world a better place when we are in our highest states of being. And when we think there's a problem that needs to be solved, if we have our awareness to come back to our state of being, then we will see that it is our state of being that has heavily influenced our perception that there is a problem. And by improving our state of being, we will shift our perception and interpretation and also change what we think is the problem by influencing it with our own higher state of being or our higher frequency. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I absolutely love that, Carlos. Sometimes it's when you're in that state, though, of the lower frequencies of guilt, shame, not depression. Sometimes it is very difficult to lift yourself out of those, but knowing that you need to lift yourself out those to actually experience, to get into that state of joy, to be where we really are meant to be, having that level of frequency out. It's are there any sort of, is there any advice that you could give that people want to get out of those states? Because I think people tend to, we turn in a modern day society, and we've just been talking about the ancient traditions, but we turn to easy fixes like alcohol, light drugs, and I don't mean plant-based medicines. I mean like street drugs, um, and or food. Bad food. The McDonald's, the sweet treats, whatever. We want an easy fix.
Right.
Um,
But
what
that's what they do. That I was a heroin addict. Why was I a heroin addict? Well, because heroin was blocking the frequencies of my lower states of being. So it felt like I was in a higher state of being. Well, I was really, but I was artificially in a higher state of being. And then it would wear off, and then I'd find myself in a low state of being, and I want to take that drug again so that it can block off that lower state of being, and I can experience the higher state of being. And that's what drug addiction is, or other addictions that do that for us as well. But yes, I do think that there is a pathway. And one, I use joy because that's a very high state of being: joy, love, peace, gratitude. Those are like our ideals. But to be more realistic, there's something better than the lowest state of being. If you're in a state of guilt, then just getting to a state of anger is a step up, or just getting to a state of acceptance is a massive step up. So it's not necessarily like, oh, I'm in a state of anger, I should be in a state of joy. Well, that's a pretty huge leap. Let's just take it step by step and get to a place of courage. I'll go from anger up to courage. That's a huge improvement. And then when I get to courage, maybe go up to willingness, up from willingness up to acceptance, up from acceptance. Take it step by step. So don't feel like, oh, I can't be in peace. Yeah, great, like peace is the highest ideal. Be realistic. But what I do think is very, very helpful for me when I'm trying to get myself up to a higher state of being is to use my memories of when I was in that higher state of being. And sometimes ayahuasca can create those memories for us. It sounds like you have a memory of being in a very high state of being
Yeah.
as a result of your experience with ayahuasca. And so when we're in states that we recognize to be our best states, our highest states, then you want to kind of like bookmark that. You want to like really like, oh, I'm going to save this one, save this right here so that when I'm in that low state, I can remember that high state. And then I try to breathe that in. Like I focus on that memory. And then when I inhale, I'm breathing what that felt like into my heart. And then when I'm breathing out, I imagine that feeling radiating out from my heart and influencing my state of being. And so I just take some moments. Sometimes I'm in a really triggered state, and so I'll like try to just follow my breathing, but connecting it with a memory of my highest state or a memory when I was in a state of joy or in that state of gratitude or in that state of love or peace. And then working with my imagination to bring the feeling of that into my heart again and radiating that out into my being and sometimes radiating that out into a room or radiating that out to a particular person as well. And and that's a strategy. I mean, it takes practice, and I think one of the things that I found to be helpful is when I think there's like if someone pisses me off, that's how I like feel it happened. Like, oh, that person made me angry. And then I'm able to bring my awareness to my state of being. And I'm like, oh man, that person demonstrated to me my state of being. They didn't make me angry. They showed me my anger. And now I'm like grateful
Ah,
that they showed me my anger. Like, oh, thanks for showing me my anger. Now that I have my awareness on my state of being, I recognize that I need to release this anger to move up to a higher state of being. And I don't know if I would have done it without you showing it to me. So I'm now in a state of gratitude
I love it.
towards that person that pissed me off because I have changed my awareness to recognize that they were showing me an anger in my state of being that needed to be released in order for me to improve my state of being. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I think that's a beautiful way of reframing it and actually taking yourself out of, like you say, we're too quick to blame the other person or say, well, they made me feel like this. But you're quite right. The only person that makes you feel like that is yourself. And yeah, if you can be grateful for them shining a light on what you're feeling or what's inside you, then you can get it out or deal with it because it's the awareness of that feeling, of that energy, and that's when you can tackle it and deal with it.
Definitely.
Carlos, we could speak for a long time. I'm hoping that I will get over to Peru and and see you in person. We're going to put the link to your website on the show notes and all your social medias as well. And if people want to reach out, can they contact you via the website? Is that the easiest place?
Yep, that will go straight to me too, and I do my best to try to respond to every person that contacts me.
And is the retreat just a final question? Is there anybody that you don't think this retreat that the retreats are suitable for, or do you accept anybody on the retreats? Because we've
Well, there
talked about
isn't
veterans, we've talked about people that have gone through specific traumas, but there's a whole lot of people out there that want to just maybe find their purpose.
there is a medical intake form, and I do think that while ayahuasca as a treatment method is perhaps the most universal in the sense that it could benefit the most people, there are some kind of red flags that we look for, which would be a diagnosis of schizophrenia or some type of psychotic disorder. I always say, like, for a person to still contact me, I'm happy to talk to someone about that because those diagnoses aren't, you know, rock solid either. But I think that there are other treatments that would probably be more effective for people that have a psychotic disorder or schizophrenia diagnoses.
Great. Well, Carlos, it's been enlightening having you on this show. I've loved having a chat with you. And yes, thank you very much for being a guest on my show.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a great time.